Welcome to Big City, Small Town, the weekly podcast all about San Antonio and the people who make it go and grow. I'm your host, Bob Rivard. 2 years ago, as the 2023 legislative session came to a tense close, a $4.5 billion bipartisan public school funding bill was vetoed by Governor Greg Abbott, along with dozens of other bills passed by the Texas House and Senate, a reflection of the governor's anger after the legislature failed to deliver a school voucher bill that would have enabled families to access state funds to enroll their school-aged children in Christian and other sectarian schools. In December of 2024, leaders from the Greater Chamber of Commerce, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Metro SA Chamber, formerly the Northside Chamber, and the South Texas Business Partnership gathered at an event organized by the nonprofit Bexar County Education Coalition to address public school funding and to raise public awareness that public schools in the San Antonio region are at a breaking point. Joining us today are Mario Barrera, San Antonio attorney and immediate past chairman of San Antonio's Greater Chamber of Commerce, and Luis Rodriguez, president and CEO of San Antonio's Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Mario and Luis, welcome to Big City, Small Town.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So where do we start? The chambers have an agenda, as they always do, for every legislative session that comes along every 2 years. And clearly, public school funding is at the heart of your agenda for this session. Mario, do you want to kick us off here?
Sure. Every 2 years, we go up to Austin. The collective chambers of commerce, will go up there for an event called Viva San Antonio. And we get an opportunity to meet up with our local delegation as well as meet other people there and go out there and we basically lobby with respect to the various issues on the agenda. Funding of public schools has been big for us since the last increase occurred in 2019. It's become very critical. These schools are really gasping for air, so to speak. And so this legislative session is going to be extremely important for not just our local school districts, but really school districts throughout the state.
Luis, I want you to jump in too, but let me note first that Texas ranks among the 10 worst states for public school funding. As Mario just mentioned, it's been 6 years since the state last increased per capita student funding, despite calls to the legislature to respond to the devastating impact the COVID-19 pandemic had on communities, school districts, and public education outcomes, which we're still measuring that impact. We've had tens of billions of dollars in funds available to legislators in this session and in the 2023 session, and there's been a significant impact that inflation has had on districts as well. And there's no clear signs, nonetheless, that public school funding will be increased sufficiently to meet the very basic needs, help these districts overcome their budget deficits, et cetera. But you guys you're pushing to get all of that addressed.
Well, it's very critical. I mean, for being ranked so low from an education platform, Texas continues to be so good at business, but we could be greater than just good if we would invest in our future workforce, which is the public education system. One that I'm a proud alumni of, so is Mario, and one where my wife and I came push to shove because she grew up private school her entire life, and I grew up public school my entire life. And I said, look, we're going to public school first. And if the grades fall below an A, we'll try it your way. Fortunately for us, our daughters were straight A students. One went on to Texas Tech and one is a freshman here at Advanced Learning Academy, down where the old Fox Tech is as well. So going back to your comment, when I met with Mario, more importantly, when I met with, not that you're not important, Mario, you're extremely important, but I met with Julia from the BCEC, Bexar Education Coalition.
Bexar County Education Coalition.
Thank you. I'm horrible with acronyms. Thank you. On my 15th day on the job, and I was hired April 1st of 2024. Ironically, it was the same hire date Ramiro was hired when his
Ramiro Cavazos, now at the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce.
And I met with her, and she invited me to the Southwest Independent School District high school over there. I think it's Southwest High School. And to my surprise, I was so fortunate to meet with 6 different independent school district superintendents: Harlandale ISD, Southwest ISD, South San, South Side, and Alamo Heights. ISD as well. They were all there, and they were sharing with me because they know that like our chambers, we are all about workforce does not start without a good education. And if we are defunding our public education system, we are not building the human capital we need to have a sustainable workforce to continue to be a great city to do business and let alone start new companies and whatnot here and attract other companies to San Antonio. But that was a big aha moment for me when she shared that with me. And I said, we need to get these folks in front of a grander audience. And we reached out to it was on Mario's agenda. His chairmanship year was public education. So call it serendipitous, per se. Me, Julia, calling my office every day to getting me to meet with her, Chairman Barrera's agenda item. And then also the fact that the leaders of the other organizations, the formerly North Chamber of Commerce, Brett, and his chairman, I think it was Joe Itziari, thank you, Mario, and also Rebecca Villagran's chairwoman from the Tamusa, and the name I'm drawing a bit blank, my apologies, but that they too were on board of getting together and sharing with our community that these business organizations care deeply about the public education system and the importance in investing in our future workforce through the public education system.
I'm very encouraged to hear both of you at the head of business organizations so involved with both chambers to be addressing so publicly an issue that's also so political. Unfortunately, public education's become highly politicized, and public education funding in Texas and in other states. Also encouraged to see some of your biggest members, and notably Toyota, coming out and talking, not just talking, but putting their money where their mouth is and committing multiple $1 million to education initiatives in the schools surrounding their South Side campus.
Well, I think as Luis said, it was serendipitous, but it was a long time coming. If you talk to probably any number of our 18 local school districts, they will tell you that they haven't always felt the love, so to speak, from the business community. And I don't think it was a lack of support. I think it was just I think everyone was really sort of shocked that the issue of ESAs, educational savings accounts and vouchers, came up so quickly. And it was hard to decouple that issue from school financing. And we all know where the governor stands with respect to school vouchers. I think there was just a general hesitancy to kind of dip your toe in the water. And I think that was the feeling that they got. And so when Luis came on board, I came on board as the chair. The Greater Chamber has a new president, CEO as well, came in shortly before Luis did, Jeff Webster. South Texas Business Partnership kind of started coming together. And then Brett Finley took over as well about the same time at the old North Side Chamber. Now, the Metro Chamber, it allowed us to kind of come together and say, okay, what can we do as a collective group? And I've told everyone, I was on a recent podcast on the issue of education, and they asked me, why is this so important to me as a business leader? And I said, there's no easier, cheaper economic development tool for a city than a well-educated and well-trained workforce. And we can kind of look and see what creative programs and ideas we can sort of derive, but there is really nothing cheaper and better and faster. If we educate our kids, as we said, we're training tomorrow's workforce. That's not only going to keep our current business companies here, it's going to attract new companies in. And that's when we just sort of came together and said, we've got to be stronger advocates. And as we became stronger advocates, we got a number of the other school districts to really join force. And in that luncheon that you've referenced in December, I think we had close to 250 people with Toyota being the title sponsor. Mm-hmm. So it was incredible.
Well, you, Mario, you referenced Governor Abbott's passion for vouchers, which is relatively new in the scheme of things. We can go all the way back to the 90s when John Walton of the Walmart family and Dr. James Leiniger together threw $50 million into the so-called CEO Foundation. So the subject of vouchers has come up over more sessions than I could count. Every survey I've ever seen over the 25 or 30 years says the majority of Texas voters oppose public tax dollars being used for school vouchers. But it's a very hot issue with the Republican base, and both Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who presides over the Senate, have made it clear that they want a voucher bill. It's been part of Abbott's so-called emergency agenda for people that don't understand the arcane ways the Texas legislature works. That allows for sort of hurry up attention to the issue rather than it unfolding over several months in the course of the session. The Senate's already pushed a bill over to the House committee for consideration. Do you have confidence that either of those state leaders and many of the Republican legislators who support that believe anymore in public school education, or do you fear that they really want to create alternative systems that kind of compete, I would say, in a free market way, except they're using billions of dollars in state funds to enable that competition, but they are, from my point of view and that of many others, starving the public school districts.
They are, and you've raised a complicated question. And as an attorney, whenever I'm interrogating a witness and they start speculating, I will object because you can't really read someone's mind. I have no idea. I've not sat down and had any personal one-to-one conversations with either our governor or lieutenant governor. I can only surmise based on the actions that I think there was a general sort of lack of faith in the public school system to begin with, because one of the reasons, if we go all the way back to when our former president George W. Bush was our governor, I mean, he was one of the proponents of the No Child Left Behind law and the need to test our children to make sure that they were on grade level, they were achieving certain metrics, and we were keeping up with other industrialized countries. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is that as we have now gone 2 decades, three decades later, the issue has become, what do you do with your public school system when you're trying to divert no longer $15 million, as was the case maybe in the early 90s? You're talking about $1 billion. And is $1 billion even enough to fund this conceptual program that they're thinking about? And then we get into the real weeds of, are there differences between an educational savings account and a voucher? And there are. Where does the homeschooling network come into play? And I will tell you, based on my reading of Senate Bill 2, which is the bill that the lieutenant governor has pushed through the Senate and is now in the House, there is no particular mention to homeschooling. There is private schools that are pre-approved, accredited. There's room and money there for tutoring, but the reference or the inclusion of homeschool is not there. Are we going to see it come back in? Probably at some point. So there's a whole lot of fight ahead, but my frustration all along has been that these individuals are not providing us with an alternative to what they're looking at. They're talking about diverting public tax dollars to fund private schools and other programs, taking away from a public school system that hasn't seen an increase, as you noted, in 6 years. What other inference can we derive from that other than it is a systematic deconstruction of the public school system in Texas? If someone would give me an alternative, say, look, here is our idea. No one's doing that. They're just saying, we want to take $1 billion right now, and it's going to be probably more, from tax dollars from our rainy day fund or our budget surplus, and this is what we want to create. And it doesn't make sense to me.
Luis, Mario says it's a fundamental deconstruction of the public education system in San Antonio and the rest of the state. And let me just put some numbers into context. There's 5.5 million school-aged children in the state of Texas, of 30 million people plus, 5.5 million of them are PK to 12. And there are about 375,000 students in charter schools, a far smaller number in Catholic and Christian schools. So we're really talking about a very small percentage currently of the students that are enrolled that would benefit. It's really enticing parents to pull their kids out of public school and to use the money to put them into sectarian schools, not just charter schools, but Christian schools, Catholic schools, etc. And I have not seen the latest legislation, Mario, but the original bill I saw made no provisions to stop you, me, Luis, or anybody else that's middle class, upper middle class, much less wealthy, from dipping into those state funds and taking money that, frankly, we don't need.
Not at all. It sent a bill to a universal eligibility, meaning anyone can tap into it. And if there's another frustration I have, and I've told people all along, it was interesting hearing Luis talk about he and his wife's approach to their girls and education. My wife and I are both. My wife's a physician. I'm a lawyer, obviously, and we're both products of public school education. When we moved into the San Antonio ISD boundary, our local schools just weren't performing, so we opted to go private and eventually into the Archdiocese schools here in San Antonio. We paid a lot of money. We didn't ask anyone to supplement that or to help pay for that. That was a personal decision that my wife and I did. And our kids were well educated. I think if they had really good public school options, they would have been just as educated, but they didn't have them at the time. SAISD has come so far in terms of where they were in the early aughts to where they are now. But the Barreras back then, if you'd have this bill, could tap into it and help offset the cost of our kids' private school education. And I scratch my head, and I'm going into retirement age. So could I save some money? I would love to save some money. But I don't think that's the purpose of what you should be doing with tax dollars. You should have some metrics in these programs, in these bills, of a certain income level where their children are in low-performing schools, maybe in low-performing school districts. There need to be those eligibility criteria. There needs to be those metrics, and we're just not seeing them right now.
You know, Rob, if I could add, whenever we meet someone in San Antonio, we always have this question we ask someone we've just met. I wonder if you know what that question is, Bob.
Where'd you go to school?
What school did you go?
And in particular, what high school did you graduate from?
And it's a San Antonio thing, I believe. But if you look at the other side of it, it also determines the quality of education you receive. And right now, especially in San Antonio, your zip code will dictate the quality of education you get. And when you talk about defunding our public education systems, especially our inner city school districts that need it the most, we are going backwards. We are not progressing. We are not doing what we need to do to ensure that I'm always going to go back to workforce, that we have the proper workforce in our city we're already the fastest growing city, right? I mean, we're doing something right, but we could do things so much better. I was the CEO of the Austin Hispanic Chamber of Commerce when I left San Antonio and went up there, and they had tremendous growth. But a key indicator when you know that they could have done something better was if I was in a room of 100 folks in Austin, and I ask, is anyone here from Austin? Maybe 2 or 3 people raised their hand. No one's from Austin anymore. No one can afford to live in Austin. No one wants to be in Austin anymore. It's a transactional city. You go there, you're 3-4 years, and then you move to San Antonio, where you want to raise a family, where you want to have a quality of life. And part of a quality of life is knowing in the neighborhood you move into as a family that you know that there's going to be a great public school for your son or daughter to start from pre-K all the way through high school, and not necessarily worry about, well, if I live on the south side of San Antonio, I'm going to have to ship them somewhere else. I better move towards the north side of San Antonio, Stone Oak or Alamo Ranch or whatnot, right? And so I think we could do a better job of not allowing our zip codes to dictate the quality of education. And I'm almost certain that defunding our public education system is not helping us one bit.
Well, Mario, you mentioned your children attending Catholic schools, and Luis, you have a daughter at the Advanced Learning Academy, the ALA, and let me credit charter schools for one of the competitive marketplace gains that they accomplished. The San Antonio Independent School District would not have in-district charter schools like the Advanced Learning Academy or the CAS Tech system, if the CAS system, if it wasn't for the fact that Great Hearts and Ideas and others came in and created a competitive marketplace, and school boards finally reacted, and they needed to react. They were overdue to react. Innovation became much more possible for superintendents. So I grant the charter schools and the Catholic schools. My youngest son taught at Central Catholic for a couple of years and told me at one point, Dad, 40%, 35% of the students here aren't even Catholic. It's a college prep school. Everybody that attends Central Catholic goes to college. And point well taken that people were looking, and people always look, parents, to give their children the best economic opportunity. But the overriding macro picture is we're becoming a minority-majority state. We're already there in San Antonio. If you want to see the future of everywhere else, just look here. And we need those public school districts to be high-performing and to be adequately funded, or our inner-city people of color, particularly Latinos in San Antonio, but also African Americans and others, are not going to get the education opportunities that people in the suburban and other certain districts are going to get. And we're talking workforce development. I think that's very important, but I think we need to expand that and say for young people to truly achieve their potential and lead purpose-driven lives, they've got to have education, and a higher education that gives them choices in life rather than condemning them to low hourly wages and a life without many choices. And so it's very critical here at every aspect, not just from the workforce, that we get the adequate funding from the state for our inner city schools.
Well, absolutely. But I'll push back a little bit on your comment about charter schools. And I have lots of friends in the charter school community, but I was in the trenches because I'll give you the short version of a story that I've told Luis and many others. When my wife and I moved into SAISD, and we moved in there because we lived in the far northwest side, lived in a neighborhood off of 1604 in Bitters named Inwood. And so we were a part of the Northside School District. Our children, our oldest had just begun like a pre-kinder program. And my wife has a practice and has always had her practice on the south side. So it was an incredibly long drive for her. So one day she said, we're moving, and we ended up in Monte Vista. And it's a beautiful, historic neighborhood. But when we moved in 2001, the school district was in very, very bad shape. There was infighting among the school board, as we've seen in other school districts. They couldn't keep superintendents. And so I came at a crossroads when I realized that the schools that we would be sending our kids to weren't at that academic level of I could retreat to my nice little enclave there in Monte Vista and let it be someone else's problem, and we would just shift our kids over to private school, which we did, where I could do something about it. And I got involved with the SAISD Foundation. From that, ended up the 2010 bond election. I ended up being the chair of that Citizens Oversight Committee. From there, the superintendent asked me to run the 2016 bond election and then the 2020 bond election in the middle of the pandemic, as you know. And
both highly successful, by the way.
They were, and you know, we've taken some grief on that because we made certain promises, and you know, we've ended up having to basically right size and close some schools that the school district did last year. And so the point here is, I saw when Mark Larson and Kip and those folks started moving into the community, and it was their beachhead was the inner city. And it was an interesting strategy because they could go to people in SAISD or Edgewood or Harlandale or South San and say, your kids are in very low performing schools. We have this opportunity, and we're basically state funded. We're not a private school, so you can pull your kid out. The problem is they weren't providing those special services that the public schools provide. They weren't busing the kids, as many of our children in San Antonio need that transportation. They didn't have services for special needs or learning difficulties. They didn't have any programs for those that English was a second language, but they started drawing these kids away. So yes, in a sense, there was that level of competition, but I think once we got to a point where we realized if we elect really good leaders in school boards, they're going to attract great superintendents. And that's what started happening to SAISD. It's happened to Edgewood. It's happened to Harlandale. We still have one or two school districts that are lagging behind, but I think everyone is really kind of working towards it to get everyone online. But at the end of the day, the school districts improved because the opportunity was there. All the factors all coalesced together. And so I'm proud to see what SAISD and Edgewood and Harlandale have done. But you're right. We need to focus on the education. I'm old enough, Bob. You and I talked about this before we started.
You can say it. I'm older.
Yeah, but not by much. We remember those days where you had someone decided that Mario Barrera was going to go into a college prep program, and Johnny over here was going to go into a vocational program, and that's how we were divided. And I don't think our parents really had much say, and I know the kids didn't have much say. So when I got that little magic golden ticket and I went to a college prep program at McAllen High School, I did very, very well. Those that did not get that golden ticket ended up being relegated to vocational trades. Fast forward 50 years, we know that there's nothing wrong with vocational trades. There are tremendous opportunities. They've done well. There's such a shortage that some of those people in vocational trades are actually doing better than people with a master's degree now. But I think the kids should be given the choice and not necessarily relegated one way or another. And to Luis's point, you shouldn't be defined of what you're going to become by your zip code.
Well, amen to all of that. And let me just clarify that although I credit charter schools with being a sufficient threat to public school districts that they accelerated some of their own innovation, I'm very much anti-charter because I consider them lifeboats treating the school districts like they're the Titanic. And so they're okay for a few, but at the expense of the majority. And
I do have to say to that point, the beachhead was the inner city schools. And I remember having a discussion with a former superintendent of Alamo Heights High School, or Alamo Heights School District. And we were talking about charters, and he couldn't understand my frustration about charter schools moving into the inner city schools and the impact. And I looked at him, I said, they're going to move into your district. They're going to move into Northeast. They're going to move into Northside. And he laughed at me and said, that will never happen. We are okay because we're doing well. And you look at the charter school system, it is everywhere now. And even they are suffering because the low enrollment that's impacted the public schools is also impacting the charter schools, and their funding has also been impacted. So it's an interesting turn of events.
Nevertheless, for legislators, if you add in all of the sectarian schools, Christian evangelicals are such an important part of the Republican base for primary voting. They see an alternative system to the public school districts, and thus my question about are our state elected leaders slowly, without ever declaring it, trying to starve our public education system out of existence?
They may very well be. I think that group is still in the minority within the Republican Party. They're very vocal, but there are still a lot of Republicans, as we know from those that got defeated in the primaries, even those like our current Speaker of the House, and many others that recognize how important public schools and the public school system is to the state of Texas, especially in those rural communities. So I will say I'm keeping an eye, and I'm very wary about where they're going and why they're doing it. But I still think there are enough people within the Republican Party that are slowing this train down and will be able to slow it down. I don't think we're going to see Senate Bill 2 in the shape, in the form that it's in right now. I think there will be some metrics put into it. You get into the testing models and everything else, the funding of particular programs. But I do think we're going to see a lot of pushback in the House. What that ultimate end result is remains to be seen. But the one thing I do like is that we finally got the decoupling that Luis and I and many others have been talking about. The voucher, the ESA bills are going one direction, and then we've now seen that both the Senate and the House budgets, so we know what they're looking at in terms of funding public schools.
And that's why, Bob, too, your business organizations here in San Antonio coming together and being united at the forefront of this is critical to help those legislators truly realize the impact, the implication that it's going to do by diverting to public education, that it's going to do to the business community. It's a direct impact, and when us being united shows a stronghold where hopefully they'll listen instead of hearing us. And it's also one thing, Mr. Chairman, that I think we also agreed upon that we'd like to continue doing forward on an annual basis is bringing the business community at the forefront with our public educators, our public education systems, to continue to build those bridges towards one another to show the collaborative efforts of ensuring we are not going backwards. We are at a time where we just can't afford to go backwards, especially Texas, let alone San Antonio. We need to maximize this growth we're having and do everything we can not to trail backwards.
We're running short of time, but I want to just share with our listeners and viewers a reminder that the legislature in 2023 had a $34 billion surplus in funding. Billions of that was not spent principally because of Governor Abbott's vetoes. None of it was spent on public schools, teachers, or district budgets. We have tens of billions of dollars in surplus funding, and most people don't pay that much attention to the state's savings account, the rainy day fund. But back when it was established, they arbitrarily said that if it ever reaches $20 billion, it needs to be drawn down, and people thought it would never reach that. Well, it has reached that. So there's additional funding that's not only available, but constitutionally they're required to spend it. I wonder, as you talk to our delegation in the Senate, in the House, whether you feel confident that we're going to get a significant infusion of state funds this session that will allow us to give significant raises to teachers to cover budget deficits that the districts are struggling with, and Mario, as you said, create the first improvement in per capita student spending since 2019.
Do I have confidence there's going to be a significant increase in public school funding? Absolutely not. If we take the word significant out, yes, I think that there will be because, as I mentioned, the budgets have just been released. I think they're both, the House and the Senate, around the same area. I think the Senate is 4.1. It's a little over $4 billion, and the House is at about $4.2 billion. The Senate's includes that $1 billion for ESAs or vouchers. So do the math.
That's really not public school funding.
Right. So now you're taking and you're really leaving $3 billion on the table for public schools. The House, their version, it puts the ESAs and the vouchers separate from their $4.2 billion budget. So let's just say realistically, when it's all sorted out through conference and a final vote, I think they'll I'm gonna do the what is it, the old Johnny Carson, the Karnak, sort of read the crystal ball.
You are dating yourself.
Yeah, I'm absolutely dating myself.
Who's Johnny Carson?
Yeah,
No, I'm joking.
It's funny. If I had to guess, I would say we're probably going to end up in the $3.5 to $4 billion increase. When you look at the factors that you pointed out at the very beginning, between the pandemic, the inflation, just everything that resulted in these increases that the school districts could no longer afford to eat in, and they've been operating on a deficit budget. That's the other thing that is mind-boggling from a business perspective, is that almost all the school districts that I'm aware of have been operating on a deficit budget for a little bit, even Alamo Heights. And so is $4 billion, $4 billion enough? Well, if you talk to our good friend, Julia Grizzard from the Bexar County Education Coalition, she'll tell you she thinks it's about a third of what we need. Maybe a little bit more conservative. I'll say it's probably about half of what we need, but we're still short. We're still short, and that's what ultimately bothers me. We take such great pride and joy in being Texans, that this state of ours has no income tax. We are drawing people, as Luis said, every day to not just our community, to our state. We enjoy such a standard of living, but we're the 43rd state in public school education. That's embarrassing.
And that number, Mario, is less money than was in the 2023 bill that reached the governor's desk that he vetoed. And the inflation rate since that bill came to his desk to now makes it even less money. So it's wholly unsatisfactory. Unfortunately, public education has become a partisan issue in our state when all of us should rally in a bipartisan way about educating tomorrow's workforce and today's children. So we'll keep a close eye on this. We'd like to have you back. We're going to try to have Raise Your Hand Texas and maybe someone from the Holdsworth Center, which is doing great work in professionalizing public school boards and superintendents and other leaders before the end of the session. But thanks for coming on to Big City, Small Town to talk about public school funding and the Chamber's efforts to see that we get the money that we need for our districts to operate.
Well, it was a pleasure. If you ever want us back, we'd love to be here. I'll talk your ear off when it comes to education.
Well, thanks for having us, Bob. It's truly been a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Please share this episode with friends and colleagues, and do sign up for our new newsletter, Monday Musings. Big City, Small Town is brought to you by Western Urban, building the city our children want to call home, and Geekdom, where startups are born and smart ideas become businesses. Our producer is Corey Ames, video by Erica Rempel, sound engineering by Alfie De La Garza of Sound Crane Audio. We will see you next week.